Right. Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Community Scrutiny Group meeting. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the local authorities, executive arrangements, meetings and access to information in regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you are not speaking. Thank you. And officers that we have with us for tonight's meeting is Daryl Birch, Service Manager Neighbourhoods, and then Derek Hayden, Communities Manager, Edward Leddy Owen, Team Manager for Environment, and Paul Phillips, Environmental Sustainability Officer. Welcome to you all. And for the first item on the agenda, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We've got apologies from Councillor Healy and we have Councillor Butler substituting this evening. Thank you.
Can I just have a show of hands to accept those, please? Thank you very much. We're not onto the minutes just yet. Item 2, declarations of interest. Is there any from councillors at all or anybody? No. Now we're on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of January 2023. Councillor Jones, got a question.
Oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. in the last meeting on the subject of youth forum, Councillor Murray asked whether there are occasions where head teachers from local schools came together and whether this has provided an opportunity for collective discussion about the youth forum, and that's been left hanging. So the question is, can we know the answer? If it's not available here, can we all be provided with that answer?
I'm quite happy to try and address that for you, Councillor Jones. My understanding was the representative from County Council that she wasn't aware that head teachers met, but that she was going to go away and see through her links from the County Council whether they did. But I'm quite happy to take that away and then make sure we feed back to all members of the group.
I mean, it is in the context that this council wrote to schools and got no answer, which was a bit astounding, I think, to all of us here.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to take that away as an action, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other comments on the minutes from the previous meeting? Could I have a show of hands to accept those and for me to sign them? Thank you very much. Right. For the next item, the carbon management plan, which I believe we've got a presentation of.
Good evening, all. It's nice to be back and to talk about carbon management. This is the second annual scrutiny of the carbon management plan today, and the substantive presentation will be given by my colleague Edward Leddy Owens, who's our team manager for environment and leads our carbon reduction activity. We'll also have contributions from Paul Phillips around environment, particularly around offsetting, which nicely complements the following agenda item. And also Daryl may have some points he wishes to add, because the community and carbon management plan sits across the whole authority. It's not just within our team. It is a shared project that reaches every facet of the organisation. You'll have the recovery report in front of you, and it gives a comprehensive overview on our activity over the last 12 months. And we've also included the action plan, which shows the 8 key areas in which our work is aligned, which are property assets, fleet and transport, contracts and procurement, policy and regulation, waste and recycling, then operational activities, and then community, business and offsetting, which don't directly relate to our 2030 target of being carbon neutral by our own operations, but feed into the 2050 target to be carbon neutral as an authority, local authority area, which is a nationally set target by government. The action plan we have is a live document. It's got lots of operational details. So what we have shared with you is a précis action plan, which highlights it and provides an overview of all the activity, but not the individual detail. And we can, if you have any more technical questions or want a deeper detail on the action plan, we are happy to provide you with that. We've also shared some case studies of some work that Edward has been leading on LAD 2 and LAD 3, which stands for Local Authority Delivery. The report makes a recommendation to endorse the work over the last year, and then to make recommendations and contributions on the emerging management actions and priorities we have for the next 12 months. So I will pass over to Ed to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, Derek. Good evening, everyone. As Derek said, I'm Ed. I'm the obviously the team manager for the environment here. And what I'm going to do now is just run through key highlights and actions of what's been going on over the last year. So if you just do the next slide, please. So to kind of start off, to bring into the context, a major milestone that has been completed is obviously the complete redevelopment of the visitor centre and conferencing suite at Rushcliffe Country Park. This visitor centre, although it had a biomass system prior, is actually now technically completely carbon neutral. The biomass system, yes, it was good, it was effective, but it started to raise health and safety concerns. So it was replaced by an air-to-water and air-to-air source heat pump, which is subsequently subsidised with 14 kilowatts of on-site solar electric generation. So that's giving you around about 835 kilowatts of electric a year, which in a nutshell is roughly 25% of the running of the air-to-water heat pump, which, although may not sound massive, it is significant because the air source heat pumps are by nature quite electric hungry. However, adding to that, because the electricity source to the park and to the council for that matter is from a REGO, that's renewable energy guarantees of origin, it is therefore carbon neutral in its operational running. So again, it's really innovative. I know it has a nice, airy, clean, breezy conferencing suite that's all hooked up to the internet. It's all available for higher use, and it's multifunctional. You have now as well an on-site cafe kiosk, and literally as of yesterday 4 o'clock, and I think completed now, is an outdoor shelter which can be used as somewhere to shelter in the bad weather and in the hot sunshine, as well as an outdoor educational suite as well. Do go for the hot chocolate if you go there. It's absolutely fantastic. The butties are great. Not that I'm trying to do a cross sell, but the fact is it is an absolutely fantastic enhanced amenity there that's open to everyone to use. You've also as well, which is absolutely critical, and I wasn't aware of this till I started in the role, you have what's called a changing place suite there. So naturally, as we're all aware, if you have public services, facilities and amenities, you have to have disabled access, you have to have disabled toilets. But the changing places site, and this is particularly close to my heart, allows people with severe physical disabilities to go out and not only enjoy the country park, but because the changing places, and there is a website for that, they have locations across the country where there's these specific sites because they contain winches, they contain hoists, and really good sound facilities to allow people to have dignity and be able to enjoy the facility, knowing that they don't have to curtail it and go home. People can now proactively plan longer journeys using Rushcliffe Country Park as a waypoint, because they know that the family member or the child or whoever can stop, have their changing, and then carry on their journey. Literally almost done. I think we are just about waiting for BP Pulse to come in. There are 2 EV charge points that are just near the entrance to the country park. I was watching the tarmac go down yesterday for the raised level crossing, and again, that's going to allow people to rapid charge their vehicle in a couple of hours so that they can go and enjoy the country park, their hot chocolate, have a quick look around the visitor centre with the interactive screen, and then after that, go back, the car's fully charged, and they've had a lovely time in between. But really, really crucially for this as well, not only did you have the visitor centre, but you've also had the new kind of ranger area and garages and lockup and that kind of thing, which is opposite on a fenced off area. But because of that, there is now a separate, safe, open, clean environment where the ranger service can operate, function, get the tools sharpened, and then use that as a base to do all the conservation works with the Friends of the Rushcliffe Country Park as well. Obviously, I'm sure, as many people here are aware, we've literally just opened the Bingham Arena, and from that is a fantastic low carbon infrastructure. I believe it's around about 78% reduced from that of a conventional modern swimming pool and leisure facility. This is because of solar photovoltaics on the office suite side of the arena. You've then got air to water source heat pumps, air handling units, and again you've got in the swimming pool you have a very intelligent use of where heat goes, how it's recycled and moved across the site through the air handling units itself as well. What's really, really crucial again is you have I think it's around about a 2,000 litre rainwater harvesting tank, which is running the what's called grey water operations, so flushing loos and things like that. So obviously you can't drink it, but what a waste of fresh water, which is just being used to obviously clean and make the facilities work. So again, I'll not bore you with the details, but there is quite a significant carbon saving by not using fresh water for operations that don't require it. Once again, you have a combined heat and power plant that is heating the swimming pool. It's doing the wet system and that kind of stuff. And alongside that, it's naturally producing heat. It's producing electricity, and that, coupled with the solar photovoltaics, is displacing the electricity that's being used on site. So therefore, as I mentioned earlier, yes, we are on a REGO tariff, but this is a significant cost saving to the local authority. So just because it might not necessarily directly affect the carbon, it is still a very, very significant return on investment for that site. I've personally trained there, and it's lovely, bright and airy. When the swimming pool was opened, it looked like it had always been there with the classes going on. But again, whilst that's going off, that's a 78% saving, which is 270 tonnes. Each average household, and I'm sorry, I do get very engrossed in carbon calculations. An average household is between 7 to 12 tonnes per annum. So that's a lot of houses taken off the grid there. Rushcliffe Oaks, again, it is not quite there, but very, very close indeed. I believe today it managed to pass all of its technical tests and things like that. So it is ready and now formally good to go. Once again, yes, it is a very, very power hungry process. Naturally, that's to be expected. You have got 30 kilowatts of photovoltaics on site, which will run all of a vast majority of the office processes and the lighting of the site. You also have, again, an air to water source heat pump. So again, all being fed off a REGO tariff. It is very, very carbon, it is technically carbon neutral again. I have had a look at the information sheets from the process of the crematorium, and the carbon emissions from the process of the service is very, very low indeed, simply because of, obviously, the emissions are in many respects being filtered and processed so that it's not that anything potentially hazardous is not going out into the environment. And as a result of that, it does mean that certainly with the help from Paul and the colleagues at Streetwise and that kind of thing, this site has a very realistic potential of being quite carbon negative, which is very, very positive. In that way, not only this, but from the dynamic of the business it is and the service it delivers, it is very, very innovative as well in how the design of the site allows for compassion, it allows for access to all faiths, and also in the background, it's actually been commented how proactively and well planned it has been for the undertakers and the people that are running in the background, so that they've got somewhere to sit, refresh, so that when it's then time to move on to the next stage with the family, they've got full access to that. So again, really well thought out. It's, even because of the nature of the business, it's very, very fascinating, and I would take the opportunity to go and have a look round. Yes.
Through you, Chairman, may I ask a question? I am a woman of faith, and I understand that all faiths will be able to use the facility. But before that can happen, it surely must have a blessing. How is that going to take place, and when will it take place?
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. I would need to take that away and find out, because obviously Ed's experience is more around the carbon management. So I'd need to speak to Rhonda, who's our creme manager, and then we can feed back to you.
Because it's so important, people of all faiths, that this has been done, you know, and we wouldn't want to mess up the whole thing by not doing it.
Thank you.
That's absolutely fair. But what I will say is, from the conversations I've had, I do believe that will be addressed. Yeah. Moving on now to, this is a very, very important aspect of the work that's been going off as well, is, and I'm afraid it also contains the most acronyms. Currently, we have now finished the LAD 2, as Derek's already said, that's the Local Authority Delivery 2 is now finished, completed, and that's also included an underspend and extra properties brought in on that as well. We are currently negotiating under the SWC, that's the Sustainable Warmth Competition, which is an amalgamation of LAD 3 with HUG. HUG being Heating Upgrade Grants, and HUG is for properties that are off the gas grid, so mains. So to date, LAD 2 finished. It was a grand total of nearly £900,000. That was also including an underspent top-up of £260,000. The frustrating thing about LAD, I'll not go into too much detail, but because of a change in building standards, the cost cap remained when the cost of delivery on the most important measure, which is external wall insulation, basically doubled, so that no longer allowed us to do as many as we'd like. What we had to do instead was do what's called a measure mix, and that keeps many a sustainability officer awake at night, where you have to do so many loft top-ups, which are a lot cheaper, and so many solar photovoltaic installs, again, a lot cheaper, in order to create an average of £10,000, because we like to keep things simple. Now, as a result of that, that's allowed us to do 77 properties within Eastleek. They are BISFs, which I believe is British Industry Steel Federation. They were basically a property that was developed to be flat pack, build quick, get people in there, living families going so that they could join the local industry. But unfortunately, they are solid wall concrete construction and they are awesome at just losing heat. So the silver bullet is to do the external wall insulation, a top up if needs be. If you can fit a solar photovoltaic on there, that's 25% of the household electricity done. But at the end of the day, and most importantly of all, this pulls people out of fuel poverty, literally overnight. The solar photovoltaics will save around about £200 a year. That's on a really, really good system. I can guarantee if you do a boiler upgrade coupled with an external wall insulation program, make that £500 a year. The boring stuff saves the most, and it not only does it pull people out of fuel poverty, but it also absolutely massively reduces the carbon as well. So currently with the local authority delivery 3, we are completely on track. We are already hubs rumbling through nicely. Lab 3 is allocated and being installed. We're currently in the process of negotiating with the Midlands Net Zero hub another £200,000 just to bring in and finish off key properties within the Eastleek area as well, whilst putting in a few solar photovoltaics and family homes and things like that. So to date, we're looking at around about £2 million that's been drawn in to that area. Fundamentally, I mean, the hug and the photovoltaics and the room and a roof as well, that's been more spread across the whole of the borough simply because of the nature of the works. But what it's really enabled us to do is hit the properties that are the biggest carbon offenders. So again, to give you really, really basic figures, Lab 2 was 92 tonnes of CO2 per annum. That's the overall projects. That's a £49,000 saving across that area over the year, continuously, and that with economies of scale will only go up because gas ain't going to go down. The sustainable warmth competition, at the moment, that is around about 44,000, but growing. So yeah.
Can I just add to Ed's point? We're working on the worst first approach. So we've looked across the authority at the worst housing stock that in terms of heat loss and carbon, and these applicants have been means tested. So in terms of the grant criteria, it is an incredibly complicated process, and there's multiple spreadsheets to get that measure mix right. But what it's essentially doing is lifting people from F and G rated properties to D's and C's, and particularly in the cost of living and fuel crisis that we've had, it's been particularly difficult to go out and find off-gas properties that meet that criteria as well. So it's taken a huge amount of our focus and energy, which has slightly diverted us away from those core carbon things. But when this funding is available, and particularly the work that Ed and his predecessors have done to get this in place with E.ON, has meant we've significantly improved the lives of a huge amount of our residents from what has been a cost of living crisis, particularly around energy over the last couple of years. So lots of really good work in that. And this is the point, we have shared some case studies with the pack for you to have a look at to bring that to life in terms of how it's affected residents. Sorry, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. So yes, sorry. Lovely. So this is quite exciting. Again, I'm so sorry, more acronyms. We have here the SALIX. SALIX is the name of the programme, that's not an acronym. But we have been successful in what is called the PSDS 3B, Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme. 3B is because it's spread over 2 years, and when I kind of started back in July, I had a good look around all the leisure centres, and I came across the Cotgrave Leisure Centre. Thought this is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, it was built in, I'd say, early to mid 90s, I believe, there and thereabouts. I then had a look in the boiler room, and I thought, ooh, there's possibly a little opportunity here. So from that, it was a case of naturally, you've got the Rushcliffe Arena, which is very, very modern. We've obviously got the Bingham Arena, which is absolutely fantastic. But then, coincidentally, this opportunity became available around about late summer last year. And bearing in mind that the Cotgrave Leisure Centre is a slightly different kind of leisure centre in the sense that more, as opposed to being fitness and health, it's kind of based around fitness, health, family orientated, and somewhere where you go to learn to swim. I mean, the flume kind of gives that away, but I really like the kind of main swimming pool, and then it curls round a bit Centre Parks-esque into a lovely kind of family pool that children can enjoy. And I thought, along with colleagues, wouldn't it be really nice if this could be focused on to be decarbonised, so that not only does it, because I understand as well, it's being earmarked for a major renovation programme. Whilst that's going on, if money could be pulled in to decarbonise it, because again, with a big swimming pool and a big flume and a big gym area, comes naturally a lot of gas burnt, and there are 2 enormous cascading boilers in there, and you've got again a little combined heat and power plant. So I was able to go away with contractors that I'd used in a past life and do a load of incredibly complex calculations. And as a result of that, we were able to produce a bid to the Salix scheme. And when it goes in, this was around about September time, I believe. I kid you not, it's like buying tickets for Glastonbury. The portal opens, you have to submit that within minutes, and then it's gone. So on a Wednesday afternoon at a country park, we'd all sat down, we got everything together, we'd done it all off and sent it all in, and we were, to cut a very, very long story short, we were very, very happy to find out that we'd been earmarked for this grant, and we've now had the formal award. So this will now enable in year 1, this is 23-24, to do a full heat decarbonisation plan on that. So we said what we're going to do. We're now going to completely survey the building, and we're going to find out exactly what we need to do. And then in year 2, that's 24-25, that will then enable 88% funding to implement the actions, which will be massive photovoltaics coupled with air to water heat pump technology. So again, absolutely crucially, there's a lot of talks going in the background, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of procurement systems need ironing out and project planning with Henry Riley and stuff like that. But it's all hopefully almost ready to go now. So so that's that. So over to you now, Paul, with the ecology and conservation side of things.
Clearly, we're never going to get down to absolute zero on the emissions of carbon from our operations. We'll still have some vehicles that are going to emit. There are going to be still some emissions from the leisure centres. So we need to do something to actually absorb that carbon, which is what is known as sequestration. So that can be done. One of the ways you can do that is by having natural spaces. Trees, for instance, are very effective at absorbing carbon, providing you keep them for a long period of time. Natural meadows, again, are very effective at absorbing carbon. So along with the biodiversity work that the council has been doing for a long time, we're also looking at increasing the amount that we can absorb through our natural spaces. We've had a number of projects, some of which have been ongoing for quite some time. So we've had our woodland free tree schemes to parishes and to local communities and to households. We've now given out nearly 11,500 trees across the borough since we started it in 2018. And each of those trees, provided it is retained, they won't all be, but we're expecting a reasonable number of them to be retained. They will all absorb carbon. We've been doing the No Mow project recently, where we've identified areas of what was amenity mown grass that we can leave to grow taller. Last year we had 22 sites. We're hoping to increase that again this year. And that, for instance, absorbs approximately 5.15 tons of carbon per year. Every year that we have that, it'll absorb about 5 tons of carbon. So it's only a small amount compared to the amount we need to do, but every little bit helps to offset what we're doing. We're also, there's a number of issues coming through planning at the moment. There's new legislation that's come in that requires us to ensure that developers produce biodiversity land, or what's called biodiversity net gain, as part of planning applications. A lot of work is going into doing that. Again, those will be natural spaces that will absorb carbon, as well as providing recreational and biodiversity benefits. So the aim is that as a council, our strategies will enable us to enhance biodiversity and absorb carbon as we go along.
Thank you, Paul. Just a really important point. So we are calculating how much carbon we're producing from our big emitters, from our fleet, our transport, all our operations. We're working on reducing that carbon, and that's the graphs that we're sharing with you. But Paul has also done a huge amount of work to understand how all our green spaces, all our woodlands, all our meadows are contributing towards that overall calculation, and then what we need to have in the future. So it's likely to involve us needing to create more spaces for planting. So large, large, approximately 40 hectares of land that we'll need to make available for planting. So it's a huge amount of planning that goes in, because we have to identify where that's going to be over the period and how we are going to sequester the carbon that we create to ensure that we meet our 2030 target, but also that we have sufficient opportunities to sequester carbon into the future. As our technologies improve and as that reduces, we'll still need to be able to sequester carbon into the future. So it's a big piece of work happening in the background, just to understand that in the first place and do all that benchmarking on our scope 1 and 2, but also how we improve the borough. And I think for us it's important that we are trying to ensure that we sequester that carbon within the borough, so it's of the benefits of the residents of Rushcliffe. So that's an ongoing project that Paul is leading on with colleagues in our estates department to see how we will service that demand moving forward. Sorry.
Apologies. So looking to the future, because obviously 2030 now, certainly as a business, because that's obviously our target, not that far away. So what we're going to be looking to do is really build on the understanding, because at the end of the day, it's not a difficult equation. It's energy in, carbon out. It's where that energy comes from. So your scope 1, we all know about, that's your fuel burning. Your scope 2, which is your electricity, and then there's the scope 3 side of things, which is obviously a whole range of services, stuff bought in and that kind of thing. But it's really working on drilling that down and finding out the most reasonable and appropriate way forward that will deliver the best bang for the buck. Again, it's to continue and develop retrofit. Now that's again for our commercial stock, but in the long time, that's going to have to be dealing with the housing stock, because if anyone here is aware of the Tyndall mapping data, and when we're looking at the borough as the whole borough, bar transport, it's housing that is the biggest carbon emitter. So that has to be addressed. I mean, obviously, it cannot be done solely through the council on its own, but it will be working with future schemes coming up. So whether they are extensions of the existing local authority delivery schemes, whether they are large scale devolution / nationally endorsed stock bond schemes, it's just keeping the eyes on the horizon and jumping on that, and partnership working to make sure that that is all captivated and done. Again, it's going to be working with the social housing providers and really drilling down in terms of getting onto, I've got another acronym for you, the social housing decarbonisation funds and the other ones that come available in the future, because yes, there are a number of registered providers, housing associations and things like that, but it's still crucial that they again maximise these schemes so that nobody loses out on this. And again, as I've already hit upon, it's identifying the devolution process and how we can work with colleagues at County Council, City Council, Midlands Net Zero Energy Hub to make sure that this collaborative, innovative approach, it gives us the maximum delivery for ultimately the residents on the ground. And again, it's what Paul has just said, which I'd like to also make everyone aware that Paul is now our senior ecologist and conservation officer. It's making sure that we've got every opportunity available with the land, with the large landowners, with small landowners, with our own land, to make sure that that biodiversity net gain and carbon sequestration is absolutely delivered on. Because again, as Paul's quite rightly said, becoming absolute net zero in living life and all that kind of stuff and just running as a business, it's not going to be entirely possible. So it's just making sure that everything can be done.
Oh, thank you.
Open it up to the floor. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Pleasure.
Councillor Butler.
We've heard a lot about the work we're doing with social housing providers, and quite rightly so. But perhaps looking a little longer term, and maybe it's not a remit for today, but just a query really. Do we have a role, or could we have a role to play when it comes to advising all householders? Because I'm suspecting that as the need for carbon reduction grows and everyone becomes more aware of it, and I think we're going to start finding people in their own houses, in private houses, wondering what they can do. But also I'm a little bit worried as well that this is going to be manna for your cowboys and such like. I suspect, I mean, most of us probably get phone calls quite a lot now about loft insulation, all the rest of it, and they may or may not be genuine. And I'm just wondering, because we're doing such a good job on our own estate and property and also working with social providers, just is there a role for us, or would it be just simply too big for us to be able to take on?
Yeah, it's a question in two halves, and I'll tackle the first one, and Ed can tackle the second part. Yes, so there's a huge role, as Ed's quite rightly said. We have a huge amount of housing, and modern housing is going to be built to a higher standard. It's our existing housing. It's our existing housing stock, which will need to be retrofitted with energy efficiency measures. We do a huge amount of work with the Midlands Net Zero Hub, and what we're doing is we're sending all queries and that to their trusted provider scheme so that they have that channel. And that's what Ed does in terms of advising people and making sure our customer service colleagues has all of that information. But social housing is an area that we certainly need to look at into the future. But we kind of have a laser focus on our own operations, but also this is the big ticket items that is going to get us to reach our 2050 target. Ed, do you want to just give a little bit more context in terms of the social housing bit and our...
Certainly, yes. With the LAD schemes, we work in collaboration with E.ON and also the Nottingham Energy Partnership. Also with that, there is the energy company obligation schemes they're being revamped, and we are looking to deliver a shared eco service, because when you do energy company obligation, you have various things. So you have a qualifying criteria, which is means tested benefit and restricted incomes and that kind of thing. But you also have the opportunity for what's called an eco-flex statement. And we're currently in the process of making sure that that can be accessed by the Nottingham Energy Partnership, so that vulnerable residents within Rushcliffe, should they come through to myself or should they go straight through to the Nottingham Energy Partnership, they are caught straight off and they can be delivered. So yes, coming from my past life, social housing, vulnerable households is very close to my heart, and they do need, a lot of them are what I affectionately refer to as the shut up and put up. So it needs to be a proactive approach. And the Nottingham Energy Partnership have proven themselves very capable of doing that down on the ground kind of thing. But certainly if someone phones in or they're part of a DFG process or something like that, it's Disabled Facilities Grant, and there are issues with insulation and heating, we would be very keen to make sure that our colleagues at the NEP jump on that. Yeah.
Just in addition to that point, we're also looking at developing a scheme through the UK SPF, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, that is looking at cost of living, particularly around energy. And ORCAN, the CAB and the CVS are looking to run some cost of living workshops, and that's where that will pull in energy advice around households and some of the measures that they can take to access these funds and what's funds available. And we may be able to identify qualifying recipients to the grant funds that are available to us at the moment through that process as well. And that will be a nice handover to our colleagues at NEP. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, these are excellent presentations and excellent initiatives, and one wouldn't want to take away from the targeted issue. I was going to make a number of points on the carbon management planning specifically, but in following on from Councillor Butler's comments about the wide range of residents, there are schemes in other counties where, in order to promote solar installations, there's bulk buy-in, or there's bulk arrangements. So, for instance, the Solar Together, which County Council run, and it uses the collective buying power of the number of residents to get a reduced price and a quality service. So I realise that's not something that's probably just up to Rushcliffe, but it could work with others, in particular the County Council, because if Kent can do it, Nottinghamshire can do it. And I'd like that pushed in some way, because it seems to me a lot of people would like to do stuff, but maybe they're not everybody's poor, but everybody's tight. And I just think that was worth pursuing. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate that our Chief Executive chairs the N2 Environment Strategy Group, and Paul and Ed are active partners within that, which drives the strategy of how we can collaboratively work together as districts across Nottinghamshire. And Ed is working with Catherine Marriott, our Chief Executive, on collaboration as a part of this devolution between Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire about collective projects that we can look at, and that would be something that we would look at as a part of that scheme, about what opportunities are out there, how can we collectively come together across this devolved area, lever in funding to deliver schemes like that on a larger scale. It's not something we've obviously prioritised the grant funding that's available to us, and we're looking at the projects because we've got a lot of projects that are in. It's not saying that we haven't discounted it. It's saying that we are prioritising those grant funding, because there's quite tight deadlines to hit on that, and we're Rushcliffe are in an enviable position that we're ahead of many of the local authorities across the area, and that's why Ed has shows that we're levering in underspends from other areas that are handing money back because they can't deliver it. And I think it's imperative on us to tackle that worst first approach and with grant funding into those worst properties, and then look like how we can influence the market at a later date in terms of that bulk buying schemes.
And I realise it's wider than Rushcliffe, but if Kent Solar together can do it, and it's pushing solar development in Kent quite well, then it ought to be capable of being done on a wider scale here.
We'll certainly take that away. Thank you.
Councillor, was there any other questions that you wanted to raise on the carbon management plan, or do you want to? Yeah, that's what we're talking about on this. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, I mean, a lot of it's brilliant. The 111 about cold water dispensers, it's obviously no potential saving, but it actually saves plastic if people start using recycled bottles again, which seem to die in COVID a bit. On 4.1, which is about policy and regulation, I suggest that there's a change to the wording, because it says promote carbon reduction policies. We ought to be issuing carbon reduction policies, and when it says ensure health development checklist, I think it should say environmental health development checklist, including the use of solar technology, EV points, and rainwater harvesting. So that's my suggested extension to 4.1. We've been hearing.
Can I just to explain that the health development checklist is the county list that has been produced. So, and it has environmental points within it. The county council produced this checklist to use across the county for all planning applications. It's done under a health umbrella, but it includes a number of carbon and environmental aspects to it, and that's why the specific mention of that is in there. But those other items are certainly things that can be looked at.
It comes down to healthy homes and design guide for, so instead of driving, in terms of driving around the corner to your local shop, that you've got opportunities to walk and connectivity, and making sure that they're built to a healthy living standard in terms of space and those building standards, and ensuring that the developers are checking through that in terms of their design guide.
It's just that I didn't see anything that indicated a commitment to policy and regulation that included promoting the use of solar technology, EV points, and rainwater harvesting, which we've heard so much of in our developments, but is important in new builds.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. To add to the planning issues regarding the implementation of renewable energy technologies on new build, at the moment, nationally, we're not obliged to, as much as it would be good to be able to make new developments be off gas, there's no requirement, legal requirement to do that. Now, if that's at the moment, between now and 2025, if a development was to be refused because you were stipulating that they must put in air to water heat pumps and a higher insulation standard and air tightness, in theory that could be taken back, an appeal could be lodged, and it could be overturned as well. That's the only other issue on this. It's that it cannot, as much as, because selfishly love to see that tomorrow, but nationally it would be very difficult to be implemented, and a developer may just say, well, we've seen another plot of land in the next district next door and we'll just go there. It's I think in terms of what needs to happen is there needs to be a double edge. There needs to be an incentive through investments and funding, and that gently needs to be followed up with a change in national policy so that it is implemented. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
And we are working with our planning policy colleagues to who are coming up with supplementary planning guidance that will, go into our local plans in terms of a design guide, in terms of the type of houses that we would like to see to be developed within the borough, in terms of that are low carbon, that are embracing those new technologies to ensure that they're carbon neutral moving forward.
I'm going to say though that we're behind. I'm not. This isn't about your role. I think we're behind as a council. There are a number of councils now that have got planning guidelines that require developers to provide those 3 items. And I can provide details of those if anybody wants, or at least certainly one. So we're a bit slow off the mark, I think, in planning terms, and I think that that's really important. I can provide, for instance, Ashford's delivering sustainable development, and it's all those points.
As I say, but planning colleagues in planning policy are working on a design guide in terms of new developments to ensure. But yeah, Annie, this is a collaborative process in terms of, and we're looking for best practice nationally and internationally that we can adopt as an authority and deliver to those benefits to our residents. So please feel free to share them, and we'll share them with our colleagues.
Councillor Mallanday, after.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Oh, blimey. Voice is on. I have a bit of a cold. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report and the sort of update on the carbon management plan. It's really good. Congratulations on getting the bids in for those and securing the money. Having worked for a local authority and sort of being involved with such bids and things in the past, I know how difficult it is to get those things sorted out and get the money, and then you just have to sit there with your fingers crossed for ages. So well done on that. I'm very pleased to see more of that coming forward in the borough in the future as well. I hear what you're saying totally about the grey water recycling. It is absolutely crazy in this country and in many other countries that we get water, we process it to a standard that we can drink it, and we use it for flushing the toilet once, and away it goes down the system. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of power to do it like that. It's a ridiculous situation. And we've had lots of stuff about the Grantham Canal at council meetings recently, and of course that was built to take night soil from Nottingham to go out on the fields in the countryside, and there's a valuable resource that we're wasting. I genuinely think that at some point in the future, people will look back at the time we do now and how we process our own waste and go, "That's mad. Why did they do that?" But it's one of those things that will change in the future, I think. But certainly, grey water use and recycling is something that we need to look at, and to find ways of actually retrofitting it to existing homes as well in a meaningful way. The solar power, I totally get about that, and the retrofitting and putting on external cladding to increase the energy efficiency of houses, certainly. But water use is something else that we need to look at, particularly as we're going to get more extreme environmental conditions in the future. And kind of leading on from that, and one thing that I would like to put out there as an idea. Now, this idea of securing areas of land to plant trees on to cover our own carbon footprint. And one plea I'd like to put is that we keep an eye out for areas that are within the urban area of the borough as well. Now, the reasoning for that is that the Victorians had lots of wonderful engineers and lots of things, but when it came to watercourses, their reaction was to bury them, pretty much, hide it, put them away, usually because there was the big stink. So you got Basildred in London and Fleet Street and the like. But that has meant that as towns have got bigger, we have more and more paved surfaces, more and more roads, and increasingly with people paving over their front gardens as well to park their cars. We have areas that are much greater in the urban area, in the suburban areas, that just create a very, very fast runoff, which then results in flooding in those areas as well. So if we have an opportunity to find perhaps areas that we could, in the urban area, that we could take back to green space to act as a sponge, to act as a swale effectively, like retrofitting swales that we have on the new build estates to our existing urban area, that is something that we should keep an eye out, because that is an opportunity to increase the biodiversity, help us give a bit more of a green space in our areas, and also address a problem of flooding, which we already know is an issue, and it's something that we can look at. And it would fit well with the carbon management plan as well. I'm not going to go through everything in here because I think a lot of it is absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of really good work. I know there's a bit, where are we? 2.8, develop a strategy for further EV charging points across the borough. I think I've got to declare an interest in that bank bit because I think that's working with the Energy Saving Trust. And that's me in this case. So I have to declare an interest on that particular bit. Done that, splendid work. Very, very pleased to see so much coming forward. And I hope that we can get national guidance, certainly on EV, photovoltaic on roofs as well, because we absolutely need to see that. And it is something that other countries have been doing for 10 years now, or if not longer. And we are behind as a country. I know that's not entirely down to the borough, but it's something certainly that we should do and push for our own planning when we can, and to push back to central government to say, look, this is something we absolutely need to do now. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
I'm going to pass to Paul because when we're looking at our offsetting strategy, it's overlaid with our nature conservation, our climate change strategy, and we look at green and blue infrastructure. So Paul, is there anything further you wanted to add in terms of his points about looking at those spaces?
I mean, I absolutely agree that we really do want to do what we can in the urban space. I mean, you've mentioned flooding, but the other one is the urban heating effect, which is another impact. The difficulty with that is obviously where people have got houses. At the moment, the pressure seems to be to have more houses rather than less. So yes, we will certainly look for it, but I can't guarantee that we'll actually how much progress we can make in that area. But we'll certainly look into it.
We certainly have been doing a huge amount of planting, and we're looking. If you look at all of the parks, playing fields, and open spaces that we've used, we used to have kind of like green deserts where they're like freshly mown grass, and now they're much richer in terms of their biodiversity, the tree planting to provide shade in the summer and to provide around the perimeters, and they're still used as open spaces for people to enjoy their leisure activities. But we've got wildflower meadow creation. We've got a lot of work we've been doing in those urban spaces to try and get them to be more adaptable to climate change as we move forward. Just a touch on the EV charging points. We've delivered a lot of them, and I'm really pleased to see every time I go to Ruddington over the last few days, it's the first EV charging point in Ruddington, and on the business park. They've just launched an innovation centre in terms of some EV charging technology that they're working on in the business park. So it's excellent to see that roll out. So we've delivered schemes at Gresham Sports Park. We're delivering the Rushcliffe Country Park scheme, and we have delivered at Bingham Marina in this financial year. So it's a testament to the amount of funding that we've managed to lever in for those projects. And now we need to look at those grant opportunities have come from being on the A roads and strategically positioned. So we need to see how moving forward will be how we service the resident population that don't have off-street parking and other alternative transport opportunities that we have to try and reduce carbon as part of our active travel plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for giving me a glimpse of my future at Rushcliffe Oaks. Not something I'm entirely looking forward to. But seriously, there was one item that caught my eye, and you'll probably realise my selfish reason for that. In the management list, 110, Mr. Chairman. Consider business case to purchase empty properties, retrofit and resell in line with empty homes policy. Strategic housing to lead on that. Has that been removed because it's not obviously a carbon management item? Although I suppose best practice could show the market the way forward, but what's behind that one?
Yeah, so we're looking at there's two plans. There's the plan for 2030 from direct our own operations, and then there's the things that may fit into the 2050 plan of being carbon neutral as a local authority area. I think it's viable, but I think what we are is not something that we're going to focus on in the immediate future, because we need to focus on our leisure centres, making sure our estate is fine, and we're not quite in that marketplace at the moment to be trying to acquire properties to do those retrofits and to resell on the market. It would be quite a commitment from the local authority, because it would almost involve setting up a team or a division to be able to do that. So strategically, it's not something that we're going to pursue in the short term, and that's why it's been structured as a senior management priority. But it is something that we will obviously be looking at with our social housing, with our housing colleagues, about how we ensure that the properties that are within the borough are more as energy efficient as possible. Do you want to add anything, Darryl, in terms of?
I was just going to mention that assuming when we come onto the work programme later this evening, you will notice that whilst the work programme is relatively light at the moment because of the upcoming elections, we have got on the work programme in July a review of our empty home strategy and the implications on council tax then, so it may be relevant to raise it at that time as well.
Yeah, so it's not.
Councillor Walk.
Thanks, Chair. It's been very interesting to hear about the projects. I think if we're going to sort of scrutinise this properly, ultimately this is an exercise that is going to be succeed or fail on the data. And it's the boring bit, but it's really the I would suggest the most important bit. I'd be interested to try to understand better, say particularly the excellent work that's gone on in East Leek. How does that impact our data, bearing in mind they're not our houses?
Thank you, Chair. Right. When it comes to the mapping of Rushcliffe Borough, there is data sets released annually from what was BAYS, before that was DEC, and now is Energy Security and Net Zero. You have the annual, and they come out late June, early July. You have the annual emissions data for every single local authority in the whole of the country. You can go on there. It's a public document. It's fully downloadable. You probably don't want to look at it because it is literally a macro link spreadsheet with millions of cells of data on it. But on there, in line with the national Tyndall data mapping, carbon budgeting for every single local authority in the UK down to district and borough level, is 3-year lagged data. So when you deep retrofit a property, that is then recorded under a national scheme. So that is Trustmark, which is SEGA for cavity wall insulation, SWIGA for solid wall. It's MCS, Market Generation Certification Scheme, for any renewable energy system fitted. That is, I'm happy for, sorry. That's fine. That basically is logged along with, I've got to carry on now, MPAN data on the UPRN number of each property. Basically, everything is logged nationally. That is then under a 3-year lag because that data has to be processed. You can look at that data, and since the 1990s, in every single district and borough, there has been quite a sharp decline in carbon emissions from gas, electric, and fuel. These interventions will, believe it or not, if you put an air source heat pump or external wall insulation on one property in East Leek, that will make national data sets. It is logged. Yes, it's easy-ish for myself with colleagues to log, map, convert all of the carbon consumption data of Rushcliffe as a business. It's not good fun, but it's doable. But in terms of interventions, and the same technically applies to Paul's work as well, if it's logged, which it will be through recording processes through Trustmark, it will be logged and processed and will be recorded in 3 years' time.
If I think I interpret the question correctly, so how does LAD 2 impact upon our own operations? It doesn't. So the LAD 2 and sustainable warmth competition. So if we were looking at a laser focus in terms of the carbon management plan that we're scrutinising, that is for what Rushcliffe Borough Council emits, what it creates, and what it's doing. That's the substantive part of Ed and Paul's and the team's work in terms of driving down that, so we're carbon neutral as a local authority. Then when we look forward to 2050, we need to be carbon neutral as a borough, and that LAD 2 and sustainable warmth competition speaks to that. Ed is correct. There's a huge amount of data that will feed through. So there's two parts to it. What I think is important, and I think I covered it in my introduction, is LAD 2 and sustainable warmth competition is grant funding that's came available because of the housing crisis and because of those issues. It would be remiss of us not to say we're going to focus on Rushcliffe Borough Council's emissions solely and not make the biggest impact on our residents. So it's taken up a huge amount of our time to refocus our work towards that area. But we have not left behind the Borough Council's work as well. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. So the LAD stuff goes to the 2050 target, not to the 2031. So one more, if I may. So I think I'm right in saying from the report we need to make 11% reduction every year, and we're sort of running at 13 or a different number depending on what you include. And that infers straight line reductions. Do we think that it's going to be straight line, or that there are things later on that will make it easier or harder to keep going at 11% levels?
So we're slightly below the trend line. If you look at the graph that we've got, we're slightly below the trend line, and my colleagues will take a more technical answer. The challenge that we have is you do the easy things first and the big ticket items. So we should be trending below line. That will get harder and harder as the years go on. Because so what we're doing in terms of the fantastic piece of work that Ed's done in relation to the next financial year in terms of looking at Cotgrave Leisure Centre will be to put in a large air source heat pump on that site, which will take a massive chunk out of our carbon emissions, because our biggest emissions are our fleet and our leisure centres. And Darryl has commissioned a piece of work where we're going to be baselining all our fleet, looking at what our procurement policy is, and then mapping that against our replacement programme, and then that journey to 2030. So then we'll have an informed decision, both financially and carbon reduction, about how we change that fleet. So as we go through our estate, when we've done the leisure centres, we'll look at the next worst performing. That will get harder and harder, and then we'll need to focus on scope 3, which is our procurement. It's about the origins and how far that stuff comes. That's the hard bit, and that's when it'll be more challenging in the years 27, 28, 29 to hit that target. That's okay. Is there anything you wanted to add, Paul, Ed? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Right, lovely. We're talking here about carbon reduction and carbon management, and I've asked this question before a couple of years ago, and I got a very sort of a lukewarm response. But what about the carbon produced in building materials? We're in a building here now that's going to be knocked down and replaced in 40 years, I should imagine, something like that. Probably the same thing with Bingham Marina as well, and also probably Rushcliffe Oaks. But why aren't more buildings, particularly our capital buildings, a bit like County Hall, built with carbon-free material, i.e. natural stone, which is mostly natural stone, is captured carbon anyway. And also in the case of County, we've got recyclable roofs. I know it's copper and this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 blah. But what about, you know, a lot of the steel that's gone into these buildings, particularly the capital buildings, it's been imported from China. You know, why is not a lot of the building materials sourced locally, i.e. timber, natural stone? They do it all across Lincolnshire.
Granite stone.
Well, granite to a degree, yeah, that's you get into Leicestershire there, but North Leicestershire, they're using limestone there. Derbyshire, you get limestone and sandstone, and Lincolnshire, almost throughout Lincolnshire, it's limestone, and it's carbon free, it's carbon neutral. I've actually built a house which was almost 100% carbon free, carbon neutral.
Norfolk stone.
Not Sandringham, that is, that's something there. It's yeah. So I mean, so basically what I'm getting at is this going to be implemented at any time in the future? Because there's a massive opportunity there to save and to cut your carbon, either emissions or production.
Yeah.
Concrete also.
We have taken this back, and for any business case or any developments that the Borough Council will be undertaking, there will be a design guide, and we will look to be making those buildings or developments as carbon neutral as possible. And that's what Ed was saying about when we look at Rushcliffe Arena, all the technology that's coming. As you will know, usually it's the materials that are most readily available in that area. And this comes down to procurement and supply chain. So will be a great emphasis. And that's what Scope 3 refers to. It's where materials are sourced for, where they're coming. The carbon journey that has gone into that building will have to be captured. And that will change over time in terms of the materials that are used to be the least carbon intensive. But it's not a quick fix, because there is a business case in terms of, does it become cost prohibitive to deliver that scheme because it's completely carbon neutral, or is it that it meets certain criteria, or it's the best that we can do at this present moment in time? So we have taken that away. I've fed it back to our property services in terms of the use of the materials that they have, and it will feed into our future design guides for development. But it can be a challenge to completely use, granite, for example, in a building, because it comes down to affordability in terms of delivering that scheme as well.
Right, I'd just be interested to see what happens when like Gotham Village Hall is rebuilt. That's been burnt down. I think I'm right there. Is that correct?
Most I opened it.
But I mean, basically what I'm saying is, the older buildings like this, it can be sourced. The materials can be.
And that will come down to the cost of redevelopment and first principles. We want these buildings to be passive house standard carbon neutral. We want them to do the best standards that we can build, but there is an affordability point where the funds that are available to do that, and then it has to come to how far can we push that envelope. Paul, did you want to add anything further on that?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Derek. It's with certainly sourcing and quarrying of stone, that's quite energy intensive. Again, it's like everything else in the sense of, to deal with stone, processed stone does also make it incredibly expensive, unfortunately. Granite, once you've built it, I've seen Cornish houses, they're not going anywhere for about 10,000 years, granted. But Bingham, I do believe, has been built with a low carbon spec. If you look at the roof over the swimming pool, it's all timber, and it's all sustainably sourced timber. I couldn't agree more with what Derek says, and a lot of this applies to everything in terms of many technologies are already there, certainly with pacifist design. I went to see a property that was 98% carbon neutral. It was air to water heat pump. It was extremely low carbon build. It had fake brick fascia and the rest of it was wood and that kind of thing. But again, the issue is cost. It's not profitable at the moment and that kind of thing. So it's just the ability is there. It's just being able to have the market stimulated so that it becomes accessible. So it's a long journey. Yeah.
I'll just point out one thing when you keep it on home, but I am a stonemason. I know, I know what it takes to get stone out of the ground, and it's not quite as energy intense as you're probably trying to say. I know quite a few quarries out in Lincolnshire, and they're all off grid anyway. So it's a generator operating a machine which just drills into the ground, and then a big digger, for want of a better thing, just takes the big lumps of stone out of the ground, then it goes away for process. But they're using this in Lincolnshire extensively, and also, I mean, you have to go to Waltham on the Wolds, which is just over the border, and there's Waltham Heights, I believe it's called. That's all stone. And you're driving through Derbyshire, it's all stone there as well. It's going to Matlock area, that around there, all the new estates, loads of new stone there. But
I just wanted to ask about the fleet on point 2.2, where it says about replacing and upgrading the small vans and vehicles. Is that kind of just being like the vans as where it's put in those facilities in the brackets and the kind of areas of business that we deal with, or is it, for instance, licensing, planners and that kind of thing have access to an electric vehicle to go out on site as well? Is that including them? Because of course there must be some miles that they generate by going out to sites all the time regularly.
So yeah, feel free to jump in anytime. It's a really exciting piece of work which Mr. Birch is leading on. We have appointed a company called Cenex who's going to do a fleet review. So in the public version of so we have good news in the fact that we have, using our exemplar site as Rushcliffe Country Park, we have 2 buggies that you'll see that go around our park, make lots of noise, fantastic diesel vehicles. They're going to be replaced with electric buggies in August. So we have procured them. It's just a matter of getting them in because there's quite a demand on these vehicles. Then we look across our fleet. We have a facilities van, which is in West Bridgeford. We've dog and pest control vans, and we've got the smaller vans. There's certainly a challenge when we get up to the big waste vehicles, but this is what this piece of work will do. It will look at what our fleet requirements are, our replacement program, and how we get to be carbon neutral. It'll also take in potential possibilities of shared vehicles for staff going out and doing service, so they've got an electric alternative if they can't afford that, and it will look at that as well. Darryl, is there anything that you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, you're correct, Derek. So yeah, we've appointed Cenex, and they are they've done a lot of work with a lot of local authorities, people like the Scottish Environment Agency, and they're hoping to start working May. The likelihood is that there could be some quick wins. So Derek's mentioned the all-terrain vehicles at the country park, which is something we've been doing prior to looking at Cenex. And then, as Derek says, pest control vans, facilities vans, those are readily available. I think when it comes to the bigger fleet, so we're talking about currently 22 refuse collection vehicles, we need to be mindful that there's a number of things that are happening. I'm reliably informed it's 2,500 days until 2030. We are still waiting for the government to tell us what waste collection is going to look like moving forward. Hopefully it's not going to take that long, but clearly we don't want to jump into starting to purchase loads of different type refuse vehicles when we're not sure what may be happening in 2025 in relation to food waste or garden waste and stuff. So there's huge changes coming. I've just written down here, I mean, I was at a conference last week and they were talking about refuse fleets. There's 4 sort of criteria you need to consider. It's currently what is available, what is the range of those vehicles, particularly if we're talking electric vehicles, what is the payload capacity, because generally electric vehicles are smaller, so the payload capacity is less, and also the cost of them. So I would love to be able to say we are ready to go now and order some electric refuse vehicles, but currently we're not. And the conference I was on last week, there are no large 32-ton refuse vehicles currently that run on electric that will cover a borough like ours. So you may well see in the local press the City Council have a number of electric vehicles at the moment. Maximum range on those is approximately 56 miles. Most of our refuse rounds in our rural borough are more like 80, 90 miles. So not only do we need bigger vehicles so we can pick up the waste so we're not travelling backwards and forwards to the tip a lot more, but we also need vehicles that we can't really stop halfway through the working day and charge. So there's a lot of work to do on that. We're also still very keen to explore the alternative fuels and the hydrogenated vegetable oil. So there's a lot of work to do moving forward. And I think Ed and Derek said at the start, I mean, it is one of the bigger emitters. It is an area we need to look at, but we need to be realistic that at the moment there's probably just nothing on the market that suits us at the moment. But Senex will be carrying out a review. They will be looking at all of our fleets. The likelihood is that the quicker wins are going to come at the smaller van levels to start with.
I just think it's particularly exciting that we'll have a plan to say, you know, when you're looking at the fleet and going, Darryl, when's that one going to, you know, and it'll be exciting to see, because particularly with the smaller vehicles that we're changing within the next financial year, we'll livery them up. They'll have our carbon clever branding, and that's where we can have our real influence. We get approximately 300,000 users of Rushcliffe Country Park per year, and have vehicles going around that this site is carbon neutral, and this is a carbon and a quiet vehicle. It's better for ecology, it's better for nature within the area. So and that will then transfer to our larger fleet as we go, as technology improves and our replacement program evolves. Sorry.
Councillor Amanda.
Yeah, I was going to say for the larger fleet vehicles, certainly it's worth using the City Council, I guess, because you're co-located with them for the fleet anyway, to keep an eye on what's happening with vehicles. I think the other thing that, I mean, you're probably seeing this at the conferences, that there is a rapid expansion occurring in these smaller vehicles anyway, what you call L series. So an ordinary car is an M series. Below that, you've got, I feel like you've got bicycles, but you've seen so many electric bikes that are being used for things now, electric mopeds, motorbikes will probably be, I think it's acknowledged that they will be one of the last things that go fully electric, because it's not what people want. But within that other category, not just the buggies at the country park, but vehicles that are smaller than you used to see for a conventional van, but electric powered, and do have the range to do a lot of work in the urban and suburban areas, and probably in and around some of the larger villages as well. There's an expansion in that class of vehicle. So it may well be that the fleet in the future does have those big waste collection vehicles for some of the runs, but there may be a different class of vehicle that you see out there doing the work that we don't necessarily see on the roads at the moment.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, referring back to using materials for building that's not travelled too far and is likely to last a good period of time. I'm presuming that when it gets to building the community centre in Edmonton on the new estate, that those principles would be applied. Don't know whether that's in your remit or not.
We haven't reached detailed design stage for that in terms of forming the plan and application at the moment, so I'll take it back in terms of, but our aim is to have every building that we're going to be operating as energy efficiently as possible. I'm not sure, I can't answer in terms of what the detailed design is on that at the moment.
I think the point that's come out from this is built to last as well, because you waste an awful lot of energy in building if you're going to destroy it in a short period of time.
Right, thank you very much, councillors, for your contributions on this subject, and I think it's gone for why we've have discussed it so long, because of how important it is. So just looking at the recommendations for this scrutiny group, The first one being considers and endorses the progress to date of the adopted carbon management action plan. I think we've all looked through that, and makes comments and contributions to the emerging carbon management actions for 2023-24. I think we've met those, so if we can have a show of hands to agree that we've met those recommendations. Thank you very much. Right, going on to the next item on tonight's agenda, which is equally linked to this one, is the environment policy.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to Paul because it nicely segues into our update our environment policy, which we update on 5 years. You'll have had a chance to read the cover report, and Paul's prepared a short presentation to bring that policy document to life. So Paul, we'll pass over to you.
Okay, on to the next slide. Okay, so we've had an environment policy at Rushcliffe Borough Council since the 1990s. So we've had one for quite a long time. That's just flipped on to the next slide, sorry. I don't know if there's a timer on. Yeah. Just briefly, what is an environmental policy? It's an overarching policy which sets out what, as a business, we want to do about the environment. It's I'm just going to look at it on my slide. It's also for communicating both internally and externally. So it's a very wide audience that it's aimed at, and it sets out the journey of what we want to do, and it's a commitment that we make to be environmentally friendly. So that is what an environmental policy is. As I said, we've had one since the 1990s. I've reviewed it recently, and there's a number of things that have been raised by members over the last few years that aren't incorporated within the current strategy, and it is due for renewal anyway. So I've taken the opportunity to add in some extra parts. So for the Rushcliffe, for the environmental policy, it's also stating that we are committed to doing our part. And it's also looking at that it is an ongoing process. It's not something that is completed in a very short space of time. It is ongoing. There are always continual improvements that we can make. And then on to the actual commitments. Oh, if we can. Afraid so. They are taking over. So we've had the first 7 items on there were in the previous environmental policy. I've added in 2 more commitments there, which is one on the natural environment and one on climate change, because obviously since the last update of the policy, we now have a climate change strategy, which you've been looking at already this evening. We have the commitments on the natural environment, on tree planting, on hedgerows. So I've added in some extra items there, which I'm hoping that you will agree that are appropriate and need to be in there. Also, members have in the last year brought forward a motion on the use of herbicides and pesticides. That wasn't covered previously, but I think it comes under the environmental protection. So I've added in a statement about that into the new strategy. So the policy, the idea of it is that is an overarching policy. It's not given the detail you go to other documents, but it gives an overall commitment as to what the Borough Council wants to do on the environment. And I've tried to bring in the things that have been raised by members over the last few years to bring it up to date. And then if we can just go on to the final slide. as has already been alluded to, we have a slightly different delivery structure to what we've had before. Derek leads up the communities team and a number of other issues in addition to the environment. Then we've got Ed, who is the team manager, who's dealing with the climate change and energy reduction side of the work, and also obviously Rushcliffe Country Park. Myself, who's dealing with the biodiversity, nature conservation, and dealing with biodiversity net gain. And we intend also to recruit a new ecology and biodiversity assistant who will be carrying out ecological survey work for us so that we know what we've got, where we can improve, and can also monitor the planning gains and the biodiversity net gain that we get over time. So that's just to set out the proposed delivery structure. Of course, a lot of it is also delivered by other sections other than ours. So planning policy, planning and growth, environmental health, property services and streetwise also play a significant part in delivering the environment policy as it's proposed.
Thank you very much, Paul, for all your work on bringing on the policy and bringing it forward to us. Opening the floor to any questions on it?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's very, very good. I'm very, very pleased to see these two new sections added, as you might imagine. I'm really pleased to see those there. There was a couple of questions I was going to have about the biodiversity net gain. And I was wondering, when we have somebody, the to be recruited person doing the survey at the moment, and we're looking at improving the biodiversity of the borough, there's a thing called the law of shifting baselines, which I'm guessing that you've heard of, where people look at around the world, and it doesn't just apply to nature, it's most things. People look around the world and see the world as it is, and then as they get older, they talk about it, what it was, and how it's changed since they were young, sometimes called the grandfather, thing like this. And people, and older stories tend about levels of biodiversity and things like that tend to get discounted, or they say it's based on flawed data or out of date information, to the extent where a good example is the collapse of the cod fishing industry off Canada, where that sea there was absolutely packed with cod, but of course it fell down in numbers totally, and people now regard the numbers there as typical, even though it's not. Another situation was several years ago when people started reporting, it was in the papers, about giant fish being found around oil rigs in the North Sea, and they weren't giant fish. They were just fish that would normally have grown to adult size. That's what adult fish look like. But most people doing the fishing industry had never seen them, but they congregated around those areas because there were fishing bans around that areas. So what I'm leading to is, when we're looking at the baseline and increasing the biodiversity of the borough, we're not going to start to it just when this person's employed, are we? Because otherwise the baseline is going to be that in urban areas there's no such thing as a hedgehog, and there never has been, because we don't see them. So that was my concern. Where do we say this is what we need to improve on? Do we look at historical records?
We do look at historical records. The biggest problem with nature conservation is the lack of actual data, in that the data doesn't actually exist in lots of cases. There are some records on particularly birds that go back quite a long way, but invertebrates, for instance, there are virtually no records on invertebrates going back probably more than about 20, 30 years. So the baseline that we can use for those kind of species is the one that we have. So in one sense, yes, we will be using a baseline from now, and we're saying we want to improve on that. That isn't to say that it wasn't better in the past. All we can do is measure we can only use the data we've got and go forward from that. We can't resurrect data that no longer exists.
My concern is obviously that there is great scope for increasing the biodiversity in the borough, and what I really hope is that we will take that and go forward. And as we're looking at here, potentially even reintroducing species, creating the habitat so that we have biodiversity that is higher than we have at the start, significantly higher than we have at the start. Not just, we've managed to bring it back to what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but we actually get it up to the levels that it would have been 100, 200 years ago, that kind of thing. Thank you.
I mean, as an example, of course, the council has set a target for hedgerow restoration and enhancement of 40% from the baseline. Now, the problem is at the moment we don't have a baseline, so we've got to first of all establish what that baseline is, but then we will be working on how to achieve that 40%, because that's what you have asked that we do.
Involves, and that's where our assistant comes in, because there's a lot of, there's a Paul's came up with an innovative way where we can do some of that baselining and some of that mapping for some data that's out there, but it's about accessing that data and then actually going out and sampling as well. But this biodiversity net gain of 10% duty is for the next 30 years. So any developments that come forward will be having to monitor, track that, baseline that, and then ensuring that net gain is achieved. So it's quite a big piece of work, and that's where we'll need that additional resource to be able to do that. So it'll be about using technologies to drive that forward as well.
Yeah, on the around the biodiversity net gain on the developments, I'm very, very pleased with that. I think that's great. What I would like to have a kind of a plea is that we have some work done on areas before the development starts. And by before development, I mean potentially in the year, 2 years running up to the sites becoming available. The reason being that there are stories, I can't get the veracity of these yet, where someone knows that the land is coming up for housing development. So in the 2 years or so before a field which might have a strip around the side of it that's kept sort of not ploughed for biodiversity reasons. In the year before it's actually turned over to housing, it's ploughed right up to the edge, and the developer somehow manages to get the farmer to thrash the hedges to within an inch of their life. So the biodiversity is significantly reduced before the actual work starts on the site, before we get people in place to do the baselining. That is an absolute concern. And also, once we get the houses in sight, one way to get our hedgerow figures up would be to have hedges dividing the gardens on the new developments, as opposed to having a solid wooden fence.
Yeah.
The developments that we see in all the places coming forward at the moment, they just have a solid wooden fence between each of the gardens. The ones behind the borough council here, they just have a solid wooden fence, and there's opportunities there for putting in, scores of miles of hedgerow, as was done in the past.
For the first point on the trashing of the land, that is covered by the legislation. If we have any suspicion that the land has been purposefully degraded from its biodiversity value, you can use there's a date set in law that you can use as a baseline. I mean, you'll have to go back to aerial photography and interpret aerial photography, but we have now got the aerial photography for last year, so that we can actually go and interpret that and look at that and see what was on the site in 2022. I think you can go back as far as 2020, but we haven't got the 2020 aerial photography at the moment. But I have now got 2022 data, so that will be, a fixed point we can go back to avoid this issue of the land being trashed. On the hedgerows issue, within biodiversity net gain, there is a requirement for all sites to measure hedgerows independently of the other biodiversity habitats on the site. So they have to do a 10% on general habitats, but there is also a requirement for 10% on hedgerows. So, and that's under the law. And there is the potential when we come forward to be looking at new planning policies in the future that we can set a higher figure if the council decides to do so.
Councillor Jeffries, you're next.
Well, thank you, Chairman. This is all fine. It's absolutely marvellous. And every child who lives in Rushcliffe can appreciate all of this. But it's the grown-ups. We've got to sell everything to the grown-ups. The way they throw their litter about, their fag ends, their cans, their etc. Richard will tell you the number of times I go absolutely crazy at meetings when they say, we'll have a litter pick. These people just throw their rubbish absolutely everywhere, knowing that some foolish council will say, let's have a litter pick and go and pick it up. And I'm sorry, but you've got to sell this idea, otherwise it's doomed to failure. These are all absolutely marvellous ideas that we can all appreciate, but I'm sorry, but a hell of a lot of the grown-ups are going to ruin it for everybody unless we take a more stringent approach to what they're doing and absolutely throw the book at them every time they're caught throwing at their litter and so on, because I think we're in a losing battle unless we are able to do something about it.
So yeah, I attended the town and parish forum this morning, which was really interesting. We had a presentation from Wise, who we've appointed as our waste enforcement specialist, and whilst we can do the educational campaigns that we do about litter, we also have the stick element in terms of enforcement for people that are caught fly tipping, caught dropping fag ends on the ground and disposing of litter. So we can issue fixed penalty notices, and we can ultimately take those people that don't pay those fixed penalty notices to prosecution. So it's a really important aspect of this work, and it really comes under the environmental improvements and element of the policy. And that's one of the things that you see as we're keen to protect and maintain the environment, but we need the people to come with us, and that there's quite a lot of support for that work at Wise at the moment.
Well, thanks.
I think the other thing I'd add, Councillor Jeffries, so members of this group may remember probably about 2.5 years ago that we had Jeff Carpenter who come in, who's the in charge of neighbourhood and the enforcement. And a number of questions were raised by the scrutiny group about the number of fines that were issued at the time, and it was in single figures. I don't know the exact numbers now, but I certainly know Wise have issued well over 1,000 on-the-spot fines. So to a certain extent, the appointment of Wise was as a direct result of what happened at scrutiny a number of years ago. So, and they've also dealt with some much bigger fly tipping incidents where we've actually been round and we've removed people's vans as well. So it's an ongoing process, but I would agree that we need to just keep educating people, but also need to take enforcement when we need to as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. On biodiversity net gain, I'd be really fascinated to know how that will actually work in practice with new estates. I mean, having seen what happened at Sharp Hill, from badgers with gunshots in the head, through to meeting one of the developers proudly telling me that they'd drowned a badger set because it was too expensive to move it. The estate on Sharp Hill is built on land where there was lots of badgers outliers, but also a number of red-listed birds. So it's really hard to imagine how you can build on a field. I mean, I think Richard's suggestion of hedges rather than wooden fencing is quite important. But it'd be really intriguing to see how biodiversity net gain actually works in practice. And that's just one comment. As to the policy that Paul's rightly included a number of themes that councillors have asked for, I was looking for something that said we will promote energy saving, micro energy provision and rainwater harvesting in new developments. And again, learning from Sharp Hill, where the developer proposes to move topsoil, which he calls it topsoil, but it's actually subsoil. There's been very little by some of the developers, very little action to protect the topsoil that they remove, and it just gets mucked in with all sorts of rubbish. So I was looking for something that would require measures to preserve the health of topsoil and maximise tree planting in new developments. Those seem to echo what we've been talking about tonight.
On the first point on biodiversity net gain, I have put together a proposal for how the council is going to manage biodiversity net gain going forward. That it's still in development, but basically we will, as a local authority, be checking up on biodiversity. There was no requirement for biodiversity net gain. So
just an example of awfulness.
But once the legislation comes in, that they have complied, we do those checks, because we don't have the capacity at the moment to be going out and doing the biodiversity checks. So going forward, we will have a process that will follow that up. As far as the things that you were looking for, they are the things that would come in under the policies that fall under the environment policy. The environment policy says we will manage planning, for instance. Those are planning policies that will come in through either the local plan or through local development policies.
Yeah, but this is an overall policy, and tonight we've heard examples that lots of us have talked about, and it like about solar rainwater harvesting and tree planting. I would have expected to see those in a general policy.
Not in an umbrella policy. They come under the. We've got a nature conservation policy, and some of those things come under the nature conservation policy. Okay. We've got the local plan, and some of those will come in under the local plan. There is a leisure strategy, and a number of things come in under that. So if we can't put every policy into this policy, because then it would be thousands of pages long. That's why we have all the separate policies that come underneath it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. It's possible that as a council we undertake activity that doesn't comply with this policy. How would we know, and what would the outcome be?
Largely, as with any policy that we have, if we're not doing it ourselves, then hopefully someone will say that it's for. I mean, this group is scrutinising the policy now. I would expect the scrutiny group to be also scrutinising the activity that is undertaken by the council to make sure it is doing what it says it's going to do. I think that, I'm afraid, lies back in your lap.
Just to add to Paul's point, just taking, for example, we, in our environmental policy, in terms of our herbicides and pesticides treatments and the work that's carried out by our streetwise department, we are reviewing the policies in terms of how they carry out their work that we minimise impact upon the environment from our operations. So we'll have a clear policy around how that is, and then it's captured within this suite of documents. So when you're scrutinising, we can provide that information to you as well. So as I say, there's within the wide, as this is an overarching policy document, it speaks to a lot of those. The devil will be in the detail within those policies of how we're achieving those objectives. And a number of those items are regular items for scrutiny, and I think that's the reference point: is how are you making sure that we're making that commitment to the environment moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other councillors wish to make a comment on here? No. I just wanted to, with everything that you said about with the biodiversity net gain and the ecological surveying, is one person going to be enough to do it, or is that kind of how long is a piece of string at the moment until that person's in position and actually finding?
It is very much how long is a piece of string. I could say I need 20, 30, and I could probably find them work to do. You know, there has to be a limit, obviously, somewhere. Some of it we'll see as we start getting into doing this activity, how much time we need. But it's not intended that we will check every single application either. We will be focused on a proportion. We'll do sampling of sites. So probably 10% of sites of the applications that come in that have biodiversity gain, we will go and check them. They have to report to us anyway. Under the new legislation, every site has to report to us what they've done and achieved over the 30-year period. And there's a new condition that is legislated for within the legislation that requires councils to put a condition on that they will tell us what they've done. And then we will go and check, as I say, it's possibly about 10% of those that they've actually done what they said they have done.
So on that, would that be then if people suspect that they're reporting what they haven't, then that's kind of an enforcement kind of way to go to that?
Yes, that's right.
That's why we're bringing in this duty, and that's what Paul's will. There'll be members that will say developments, and Paul will have assessed the ecological plan and how they're going to achieve their 10% biodiversity net gain, and we'll have reports from residents from Sharpwoods as an example in terms of residents members in terms of that, and then we have those, we're able to pass that information to our planning and enforcement colleagues to take action using our tools and powers that we have as a part of planning, and that's what this duty brings in. It's ensuring that the sites are better off than when they were when we started.
Sorry to rabbit on about it, but
You're not sorry at all.
no, enjoying it. But Paul's suggested why mentioning solar power, rainwater harvesting, trees and all that isn't appropriate in this big policy. So is it going to be in the carbon management plan, which is the specifics? I think it ought to be in one or the other.
It will depend on what it is. If you're talking about things that are to do with building a house, then it will come under the local plan. If it's something that is to do with the management of wider sites, then it will come under the nature conservation strategy. If it is to do specifically with carbon, so solar, the solar panels and things, if it's not solar panels to do with planning, then yes, it may come under the carbon management plan. And there is already things in there about solar power within there. So it should be picked up in a policy. It depends what it is as to which policy, though, it will come under.
Yeah. If there's no other, Councillor Jeffrey.
hedges have been mentioned on several occasions this evening. I am particularly interested and fascinated by a local, I'm not quite sure where they're based, a group of people who actually go out and, you know, they cut the bottom of the plants and they weave them in and out and so on. And we have got some superb people in Rushcliffe. I don't know where they're based, but they do absolutely magnificent work. It's quite superb. We're most fortunate. And if we can use them, I say, get hold of them as soon as you can, because they do wonderful work. Thank you.
I quite agree. Hedge laying is it's a traditional craft and is actually very good for the ecology of the hedge as well. Now we have some people who do it voluntarily. So at Eastleek, we've got the Friends of Eastleek who've just laid some of their some hedgerows within Meadow Park at Eastleek. In other places, there are contractors who do it, you know, and are paid to do it. When you have quite large areas that need doing on roadsides, it's usually a contractor that's going to be doing it. So it depends where, but yes, it's a fabulous art and something that we need more of. I'd agree.
Yeah. Also, in Wales, my husband told me that actually they have a base of stones first before they actually then get on with the hedging.
Across the country, there are different regional styles of hedge laying, and within this area, we tend to use one that's called the Midland bullock style because it was intended to keep bullocks in the field originally.
Yes.
Before we had barbed wire and such like, it was how you kept your bullocks in the field, and that's the style which has the weaved top to it.
Yes.
Is the Midland bullock style.
We have a small grant scheme that Paul also operates for hedge laying as well. So yeah, it's something that, and I'm sure it'll come back in the future in terms of our how we achieve that 40% net gain in our hedgerows, that we may look to enhance that and see more of that across the borough.
All right, thank you very much, councillors, for contributions onto this on the environment policy. Just going on to the recommendations that we've been asked of for the scrutiny group. Reviews the draft updated environment policy. I think we've really done that. Make suggestions to officers where the draft policy does not yet meet the needs of the council, and we've done that, and recommends that council adopts the updated environment policy. So if I can have a show of hands on that, please. Those four, please. That's unanimous. Right, thank you very much, councillors, on that. Just going on to the last item on tonight's agenda, which we've been touched on earlier, is the work programme. And as you'll see on there, future meetings are to be confirmed with topics, but for July 2023, the review of the empty homes strategy and council tax implications is on there. I did, from my last meeting, take back a comment about items coming to this scrutiny group, and it was felt with the scrutiny, it's like we've had tonight, nearly an hour and a half on the carbon management plan. It is often very difficult to preempt how long we are going to take to discuss items at this scrutiny group, because of the nature of what we discussed. So, like with the previous meeting where we had about the setting up the youth council, that was envisaged to be quite a hot topic item as it came to full council as a motion, and then came through to scrutiny. But again, please, any councillors who have got items that they wish to be scrutinised, please submit scrutiny matrices and that kind of thing for any for consideration by the group. And the group in the new term after May will be looking at the whole process and matrices and all that and how it works as well. And that's what I was told at the meeting. So if I can have a show of hands, or if there's any comments on that works programme, as at the moment there's only the one item in July. Otherwise, I'll ask for a show of hands to accept that for next time it goes to the corporate. Yeah, well, that would be it as well.
It is unusual, always at this time in the life of a council, isn't it? Because we're coming to the end of an existing council, and who knows who's going to be around in the next meeting anyway. So it's perhaps understandable why you may not have that many items on the forward plan just yet, because the circumstances, as I say. So I wouldn't worry too much about it at this stage. But once you get the new council in place, then lots of fresh ideas will be coming through, and you'll probably find there's too many items coming through for scrutiny. It's just the way the timing works.
If I could have a show of hands to accept that recommendation as we do, and those against, and any abstentions. All right. Right, that brings us to the end of tonight's meeting and all the items on the agenda, and just wish to thank everybody for their contributions to the community scrutiny group for this last year and going forward into the next elections and that, and see what happens and how scrutiny and everything is looking on the next after May. So thank you very much for everybody's contribution for the year. Thank you.